Hi, everybody. Hello, everybody. We're going to get started now. As people come in, they can grab a seat, and I would just want to begin. I'm just going to get my notes here. And thank you to everybody for coming to Introduction to Tobacco Harm Reduction, the case for vaping. I think this is the first ever conference that we have for tobacco harm reduction in Canada. And for me, it's a dream come true. I think it's important that we have these conversations. It would have been nice that we had a more eclectic group of people here who had different positions so we can open and start the conversation. However, I believe if we continue to build events like this, they will come. They can exclude us, but that does not mean we need to exclude them. I want to welcome everyone that has joined us today in person and around the world online. Thank you for giving us your time today on World Vape Day. Our wish is that each of you is inspired by one or more of our speakers, and that inspiration motivates you to push the conversation further to ensure that this life-saving product is available to all Canadians who smoke, till we no longer lose 48,000 lives a year to tobacco-related illness. Today is important. For years, there have been many conferences like this that shared a position on vaping that was not about the person who is most affected, and that is the end user. I personally started vaping in 2010. Until recently, my biggest fear was that we were going to lose flavors. And let's make it clear, that fear is real and justified. But what's not justified is how we've been willing to trade anything and everything to keep flavors. Because this fight for vaping, it's bigger than a single person. It's more than a singular feature that keeps people smoke free. Vaping is a holistic product. It's a combination of nicotine strength, the device you use, the flavor, the price, and especially the support that we got at the beginning from the community. This fight is for those who smoke and making sure that access and affordability are not barriers for those who are choosing to use tobacco harm reduction as their tool to quit smoking for good. This fight is not about giving up something to keep something in return. This fight is for those that smoked and those that still smoke. The fight is about ensuring that regulators and politicians are being true and walking their talk and following the science, not being swayed by moral panic. We need to stop giving it all up just to keep flavors. We need to stand our ground. We need more information about vaping readily available that is thoughtful and truthful, not a tax that can be financially debilitating and force people to make a very difficult decision between buying a vape or buying a pack of cigarettes. I want everyone to remember that this industry that we are targeted about and bullied, it was created by people who smoke, for people who smoke. And now it's being regulated by people who do not understand what it is like to smoke and fear it. They are ignoring the needs of the adult, and fear and misinformation is what is guiding them and us now, and we need to continue to speak up. Someone once told me that taxation legitimizes the vape industry. I'm going to swear. I say bullshit. The Tobacco Vaping Products Act legitimized us, and it is our job not to make trade-offs, but to make this product better, stronger, and more available to every single Canadian who smokes. Because I'm not prepared to make any more trade-offs for someone else's choice on harm reduction. Whew, that was heavy. So today I am very excited for the group of speakers we have. We're jam-packed. We have a jam-packed schedule, so I'm not going to waste any more time and get right into introducing our first speaker. I had the pleasure of connecting with him back in 2021 when I was looking to secure guests for the ever popular YouTube series, Between Two Vapes. And right there, I found this professor who has a personal reason for why he's gotten into this fight and so passionate about it. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you all to Professor Ian Irvine.
Thank you very much, Maria, for inviting me here. I work at Concordia University in the economics department, so I'm a teacher and an academic, and you all know that academics are very good at turning 20-minute presentations into 40 minutes, and this morning I'm going to try to turn a 40-minute presentation into 20 minutes, so if you see people waving their hands frantically after 20 minutes, then you know what's going on. So thank you for inviting me here. Just want to say a few words at the start. Many of the charts that I'm going to present, this is for the most part a data-driven presentation, but most of the charts that I'm going to present come from a report that I have been working on, and that has been funded by the Foundation for a Smoke-Free World. I have a co-author on the project. He is Sam Hampshire. He is the managing director of a small consulting company in California. It's called Botech, back of the envelope calculations. And he is committed to harm reduction. He's worked on cannabis legalization. His company's worked on juvenile sentencing and also on vaping. But unlike some groups who get $1 million from Health Canada every year, they have to go out into the marketplace and find funding to support their research, and consequently the funding here from the Foundation for a Smoke-Free World is part of that. I want to thank, I have a number of people that I have thanked in the introduction, and I have made disclosures about my own history, and you can see that all on the first few slides. The slides will be available on the website, so I'm just going to go over things very quickly, but I just want to say a particular thanks to the Jewel Corporation and Christopher Harris, who made their Nielsen data available to us for analysis. So we're very grateful to them for having done that. I'm not being paid. I want to say I'm not being paid to speak here, although Maria kindly managed to get my hotel room paid for, but I'm not being paid, and I haven't been employed by any of the vaping organizations in Canada. She said I had a personal reason for it, and that comes in the form of the fact that about 8 years ago I was in Arizona with my younger son, and he'd been a pack-a-day smoker, and he took me into this vape shop, and he insisted on my going in there. I didn't want to go, and he said, "Come on, you're coming in." And then we went in here, and we were met with all these wonderful sensations that you get from people talking to one another and people experimenting with different flavors and concentrations and so forth. And then he spent an outrageous amount of money on a device, which I thought, but he's been vaping ever since. And so that's my personal journey, and that preceded all of my interest in vaping. So I have a genuine commitment to this. It's not just something that just happened for me to get interested in. So can you flip through the first 3 or 4 there? Yeah, this is all the funding and thanks to people. There's my son at the bottom, Neil. So the context. Well, in Canada, we've got a very tolerant attitude to a number of different substances. When it comes to alcohol, we sell Poire William, we sell Calvados, we sell seasonal beers. All of these things have very strong flavors, and some of them have high alcohol content. When it comes to gambling, when you go to your local corner store, just above the candy, if you have children who are buying their candy, you'll see a lottery machine placed strategically. If you go ahead and if you want to consume psychoactive substances with enormously elevated levels of the psychoactive ingredient, 25% THC, you can get that too. Gambling, you can go online, usually with a provincial monopoly, and lose vast amounts of money very easily. Instant gratification. So we've got all of these products out there, but there seems to be a sort of a moral crusade against vaping nonetheless. Go ahead. Several years ago, no, go back. Oh, several years ago, Mr. Trudeau admitted to consuming cannabis, and I often wonder what the world would be like today if instead of admitting that he had consumed cannabis, that he said, "Well, I used to be a smoker, but now I'm a vapor." Would we still be on this theme? Instead, what we have now is a moral crusade against vaping, and here's an old image that I found, which perhaps previewed the arrival of the anti-vaping campaign, and you can see that there's an aerosol cloud up there, and I suspect the leader here comes from the University of California at San Francisco. I won't make any suggestions about Canada. So my presentation is two parts. One is data-based, primarily on the Nielsen surveys and also the Canadian tobacco and nicotine surveys. And then I'm going to just do a little bit of exploration on why Health Canada was motivated to bring in the 20 milligram limit. So the Nielsen surveys are based on gas and convenience stores. So we don't have data on the vape shops. We're hoping that that's going to be all available in the future, and we'll be able to do a more complete analysis. So the graphics that I'm going to present are based on weekly sales by province, and we have data on a whole variety of different products. And as I say, these were kindly made available to us by Juul. And then the Canadian tobacco and nicotine surveys, they're useful indirectly in trying to figure out what's happening in the marketplace, and they are publicly available, and I've been working on those, but still in the middle of doing that. So I'm going to present a few charts. Here's what happened to sales in gas and convenience stores. This is not the whole market, it's just about a third of the market. And I've got three arrows here. The first arrow on the left refers to the period which corresponded to the E-Valley crisis, and people got very scared about vaping, and sales went down. Then they recovered, and then there's another peak, and then there's a big drop, and that was during 2020, and that was primarily due to the fact that several provinces, which accounted for about half of the population, brought in very strong regulations against vaping in gas and convenience stores. So British Columbia, Ontario, Nova Scotia, and that accounts for the drop in the second big drop in the sales data there. And then if you look at when the 20 milligram limit came in federally, that's the third arrow on the right-hand side, you'll see that the perturbation there is really pretty small. Right. It didn't seem to have done a great deal to sales in gas and convenience stores, and I suppose the reason for that is primarily that provinces with more than half of the population in Canada had already adopted very strenuous measures against vaping, particularly as it applied to the gas and convenience stores. So an obvious question from this is, well, in response to these measures on the part of the provinces, is there any way of trying to infer what might have happened to expenditures in the vape shops? I hope you were all beneficiaries of an overflow of expenditures from the gas and convenience stores, which describe these data, to the vape shops. So basically what has happened over the last 3 years is that Juul dominated the gas and convenience store market initially, but Vuse has come on very strongly. And right now, if you look at the ratio of Vuse sales to Juul sales, you're at about 6 or 7 to 1. You're at about 6 or 7 to 1. And so what has happened here is we've got three different flavors. One is tobacco, one is mint menthol, and the other is flavor. And Juul made a decision for Canada to vacate the other flavor market, and that's the orange line there in late 2019. And then what happened is that the sales of those products all during 2020 just went lower and lower and lower. So you can see that the total sales of the Juul products, if you add all of those together, have gone down very substantially since their peak in late 2019. Go ahead. Vuse In contrast, that downward part of the orange function corresponds, I think, to 2020, when the different provinces enacted measures against vapes in the gas and convenience store market. So Vuse has done much better than Juul in the market, and partly that's due, I think, to the fact that Vuse decided to get out of non-mint menthol tobacco flavors, but it also must represent some more aggressive marketing on the part of Vuse as well. Go ahead. So if you ask the question, well, if you take the Health Canada measure of the 20 milligram limit and you put that together with all of the measures adopted by the different provinces, how much of an impact did that have on the total federal market? Our guess is about 35% being conservative. So we're just making a guess that the market was almost saturated, not quite saturated, almost saturated, and you imagine what it might have been without these measures, and then you look at what it is, and we're getting a gap of a third or 40% there. Now, some of that will have gone over to the vape shops, so this is not a decline in total consumer expenditure on vapes. British Columbia, this is just an example. The drop was much more steep, so what you're picking up, and you can go to the next one too, Ontario. So we had very steep drops in these provinces because these were the provinces where the measures came in. And so what you're seeing in the national data is primarily driven by Ontario and British Columbia, and to a lesser extent Nova Scotia, not because the measures in Nova Scotia weren't strong, but because Nova Scotia is a smaller population area. Where do the expenditures go? Well, we don't know. We, as researchers looking at the data, do not know. We think some of them went to the vape shops. We haven't got publicly available data on this yet. We hope we will have at some point in the future, and we'll be able to see how much diversion took place. So what we're trying to do in this research is to use an indirect way of looking at how consumers behaved. And if you look at the Canadian Tobacco and Nicotine surveys, December 19 and December 20, they neatly bracket these provincial measures. So we're trying to break up the provinces into two groups. One group of provinces where the measures were enacted against gas and convenience stores vaping, and the other provinces which did not experience the same kind of regulations. And we're trying to look at how vaping behavior evolved over time. It's very difficult to do that. You think that this is a nice, clean experiment, but the data don't always give you the results you anticipate. Go ahead. Yeah, this is just a summary of the measures, which you all know. Keep going. Yeah, thanks. Keep going. So what we did was we looked at vaping by age, and we've got three age groups here. The 2019 CTNS is on the left, and the 20 is on the right. And what we find is from the surveys that the total number of vapors is about the same, but there's a nice result here from anybody who might be from Health Canada in the sense that the number of young vapors went down and the number of older vapors went up, given that you've got the same total. This still doesn't tell you a whole heck of a lot, because what happened in the United States was exactly the same pattern. There was a huge decline in youth vaping between 2019 and 2020. And so when we look at the restricted and the unrestricted provinces, there are interesting patterns here. We also haven't gotten to separating out those young people who are just occasional vapors. You know, you see these scare statistics in the media, but they're based on all of the kids who have experimented with vaping either in the past year or the past 30 days. In fact, there's just a tiny group of youth who are vaping with a high frequency. That's 20 to 30 days. And so really it would be nice to know how that group of people was impacted by these regulations relative to the group of young people who are just occasional. We haven't gotten there. And so then we started looking at, well, maybe what's happening, there are questions in the surveys, where do you get your vape supplies from? So one question has to do with, do you usually get them from vape shops? And we said to ourselves, well, probably what's going to happen is the provinces in which restrictions were imposed experience more of a diversion to the vape shops than in the other provinces. And we found that the number of people who responded that they usually get their supplies in a vape shop went up between these 2 years for the provinces that were subject to the regulations, but the numbers also went up for the provinces which were not. So we're still struggling with this. We want to look also at quit data between these two provinces to see if the regulations had an impact on the ability of individuals to move to different products from cigarettes. So one hypothesis would be that if you make it more difficult for people in some provinces by putting regulations on sales in gas and convenience stores, maybe it's less likely that smokers would make quit attempts in those provinces relative to the provinces which did not experience those measures. So we're engaged in that. And so the data have lots of interesting possibilities, but we really don't know how they're going to work out. We also have data on cigarette use, and we could look at cigarette use between these different groups of provinces and see if people went back to use cigarettes. But one of the problems with the data is that there are only 8,000 observations for goodness knows how many different regions, and if you want to look at the behavior of teenagers in Nova Scotia, you may have 6 observations or something, so it's really difficult, and 5 minutes, okay, better keep going. Keep going. Why did Health Canada, well, in the paper that we will ultimately make available, I make an estimate of what this cost. Are you going to give me an extra couple of minutes for the minutes I lost, please? So why did Health Canada put this measure in? Well, it cites the EU directive. But if you read the EU directive is almost exclusively about handling safety of this product. So it's not due to the fact that they're worried about people consuming high concentration. This was in the pre-Juul and Vuse days. It was in the days before 50 and 60 milligram concentrations came along. 9 out of 10 vapors were already vaping product that was in the UK that was less than 20 milligrams. And the reason for the directive was that the EU was worried about kids consuming the stuff or individuals burning themselves, because most of the devices that were being used at the time were, roll your own, for want of a better expression. And so that's what the EU directive was primarily about. Only secondarily do you find mention about the fact that, well, maybe 20 milligrams is enough for people. So go ahead. So this is a canard. This is not a justification for invoking the EU. The Health Canada reports also invoke Saudi Arabia, which is hardly an ideal model. And too often we tend to think in Canada, particularly in Ottawa, if the Europeans do it, it must be right. There's like a halo over European decision making. And anyway, I won't go on about the CBC. Go ahead. Why is vaping good for smokers? Vaping is good for smokers because it gives you a peak hit. It mimics the sensation you get from cigarettes, but at a lower nicotine intensity. So this is a graphic I've taken from a recent presentation. The hump-shaped one is from the patch. So if you get the patch, you get a slow release of nicotine into your system, but it doesn't, the delivery of nicotine doesn't mimic a cigarette. And so the top one is nicotine concentration in the bloodstream from a cigarette, and the other 2 lower peaks are nicotine concentrations from different e-cigarettes. So you can see that why e-cigarettes are good has been validated in laboratory experiments. It gives you a reduced but similar sensation to what you get from cigarettes. Go ahead. Health Canada is very concerned about teen use. They commissioned a report done by Quarus Consulting. And this, as far as I can see, is the main input into their decisions. 36 regular vapors, and they all said that they love the buzz from an e-cigarette, even though if it is only a fraction of the buzz they would be getting from cigarettes if they were smoking cigarettes, as you saw on the previous slide. But the interesting thing is that if you read that report on page 38, you'll find that a lot of these teenagers were saying that if we weren't vaping e-cigarettes, we'd be on combustible cigarettes. That's not me, that's Health Canada's own report. Go ahead. Health Canada, in its cost-benefit analyses, which in my view are really not very good analyses, they invoke the idea of a gateway. The more kids that vape, the more smokers you're going to get, and the more health damage is going to come about. This is the gateway hypothesis. But this isn't so. And the simplest way of seeing that in the Canadian context is that given the huge increase in interest in vaping over the last 6 or 7 years, if it were true that vaping was a gateway to cigarettes, where you would expect to find an increase in smokers is among the 20-year-olds. But when you look at Statistics Canada's own data here, the biggest drop in smoking in the last couple of years has been exactly among that group. We're down to 5% regular smokers among the 20-year-olds, and they have done this themselves, despite Health Canada, not because of Health Canada. Go ahead. If you think of toxicity for youth, what I like to do is to compare how much toxins teens in the 90s were consuming from cigarettes relative to the toxins being consumed today by vaping teens. So if you take the almost daily vaping teens today and the daily smokers in the 90s, the ratio of toxins being taken in might be 100 to 1. That's right, I meant to say 100 to 1. Public Health England tells us that the toxin content of aerosol is about 5% of cigarette smoke. And if you've got the much lower rate of vaping than smoking you had in the 90s, you're getting a ratio of, you've 1/5, you've 1/5 times 1/20th. People will argue with that, but that's the way it is. Then I talk about Health Canada's cost-benefit analysis, and since I've only a couple of minutes left, I'm not going to go into this, but I've got some red flags here. Cost-benefit analysis is very difficult here, and I sympathize with the people in Health Canada trying to do the work. That said, they're not doing it up to a satisfactory standard, and one of the problems is you have to balance the value of lives saved in the future with the costs incurred by industry today. So you have to convert life years into monetary values. It's a very, very difficult undertaking. And what Health Canada does is it doesn't value those lives very seriously. And then it's forced into making very unrealistic assumptions. Keep going. I just go back to that one. I'm just about 2 minutes, Catherine, can I take? We keep forgetting that there are 40,000 people dying prematurely, and this almost exclusive interest on the part of Health Canada on youth is just hard to understand in that context. And we were recently asked for input on the review of the Tobacco and Vaping Products Act, and David Sweener has a very nice submission on this, because the background document to that invitation was almost exclusively focused on young people and hardly at all on the people who are dying in huge numbers prematurely. So we really need to get to that. Just one more comment. How is the market reacting? Well, there was a very interesting paper that came out several months ago, and it involved a laboratory experiment of a new Juul product, I think that's out in the UK. I think it's called the Juul 2. Christopher can correct me on this. But basically what they've done with the new product is they've enlarged the tank, changed the wick, improved the airflow, and in these laboratory experiments, people are now able to get as much nicotine from the new product using an 18 milligram concentration as they were able to get using the 59 milligram concentration in the old product. The market's reacting. You can't control everything. And what so many journal articles have been pointing out over the years is that the amount of nicotine that people take in is not just a function of the concentration of the product. It's the way people use the product, and it's what device they use and how frequently they use it. And so you've got to expect that the market is going to respond to measures. Sometimes the market will be successful in circumventing the measures, sometimes less so. This is an example of the market reacting. So what can Health Canada do better? Just to close my remarks. Even though I've been very critical of Health Canada, I was very heartened to see some new, very informed, scientific people with wonderful research records being appointed to the Vaping Advisory Committee in Health Canada. This, I think, is a big step forward. Their names have just been added, and they are wonderful, wonderful researchers. So that is cause for hope that they may be able to influence the very dated thinking that goes into the work in the Tobacco Directorate. I would encourage Health Canada to do what the climate people do. Make their models available to the public. Hey, here's our computer model. Take it, simulate it, change the assumptions, see what happens, help us. We don't find that. I'd also encourage Health Canada to think about what messages they might put on cigarette packs. Rather than saying, don't, thou shalt not on either side, maybe give a positive message on one side. Here's how you can quit smoking. You can use vaping, you can use the patch, you can go to just bigger positive measures rather than 2 negative measures. Health Canada needs to inform the public. 4% of the Canadian population knows that vaping is much less risky than cigarette smoking. 4%. Not my numbers, Statistics Canada numbers. People need to know. And a disappointing number of doctors are reluctant to, or seem to be unaware that it's not nicotine, it's the tar and the toxins that are produced during combustion. So it's a big educational job that Health Canada could undertake here. So that's it. I'm sorry I've gone a minute or two over, and these slides will be available, and I will have a research paper out in the next couple of months. So thank you very much.
Short people problems. Thank you, Ian. Oh, thank you so much. That was a lot of information. It was interesting information. It really challenges the way we look at things, the way we can communicate with things. The presentation will be available because we want everyone that uses vaping products, everyone that believes in harm reduction to have access to this information, because the more educated we are, the more empowered we feel. And empowerment gives us the opportunity to engage, and we don't want people to stop engaging. So now we're up to our next speaker, and I don't believe he really needs an introduction here in Canada or anywhere in the world, because I do believe at one point during our time as people who vape, we've heard his analogies, we've heard his zingers, and he's an incredible person who has fought for people who smoke for decades. And I have had the pleasure to hear him speak. I can't even count how many times. And I'm also grateful to be able to call him my friend and a mentor. And I would like to welcome Professor David Sweener.
Thanks, Maria. It's nice to be here. Among other things, another talk I'm giving today it will be at about 1:30 in the morning, virtually in India, and I plan to be more awake now than I will be then. And I'm trying to figure out the same ratio as I'm dealing with here. How much caffeine do you need to have in order to function well without having so much that you start just doing that caffeineism thing? As Maria says, I've worked in this area for a long time. I was the first lawyer in the world to start working full-time on policy measures to try to reduce the carnage of cigarette smoking, and that was about 40 years ago. When I got involved in Canada, the daily smoking rates among 15 to 19-year-olds was 42% daily smoking. We consumed more cigarettes per capita than any country outside the then Warsaw Bloc. There were a few in then Eastern Europe that somehow managed to top us. We grew more tobacco per capita than the United States. I think there were 4 sitting senators who were on the boards of cigarette companies. There were no limitations on cigarette advertising. The only warning on cigarette packages was one created by the tobacco industry that was nonsensical. Very small lettering on the side of the pack, some of you might remember, saying Health and Welfare Canada advises that danger to health increases with amount smoked. Avoid inhaling. taxation, the price of cigarettes adjusted for inflation had fallen since the time of the Second World War. And we knew from the research that the principal reason young people start smoking is affordability. And I could go on in terms of just what a mess it was. And it was a matter, as a lawyer, of saying, what are the policy measures we can do to try to reduce this toll? And we had a tremendous amount of success on a whole range of things. So within 10 years, we reduced cigarette smoking by young people by 60%, by the overall population by about 40%. No other country had ever accomplished anything like that. And that allowed our experience to be used worldwide to say, what are some of the things that you can do to try to reduce the toll? So that's an indication that you can have success. But another way to look at this is that when I got involved, cigarette smoking was the leading cause of preventable death in Canada. It's 40 years later, cigarette smoking is still the leading cause of preventable death in Canada. There are millions of people still smoking cigarettes. And most of us in this room, like me, will have sat with people who are dying as a result of smoking cigarettes. My case in dealing with friends who hadn't reached 50. The toll is horrendous. You can't have death tolls in the range of, depending which estimate you use, from 40,000 to 48,000 a year, without them being a lot of people we know, their friends, their colleagues, there's, their relatives. It's a horrendous toll. And when we look at how do you tackle something like that, I think one of the ways to look at this is how do we tackle other things? Because most of us in this room wouldn't be alive if we hadn't already dealt with a whole lot of other things that cause death, injury, and disease. We look at the contagious diseases. How did we deal with that? We used science, we used reason. We figured out what was causing the problem. We found ways to deal with it, whether it was things like sanitary food or clean water or vaccinations. We found ways to look at whatever was causing risk to reduce those risks. And that's why, even from the time I was a teenager till now, the death rates per kilometer driven in cars is down by about 85%. The sort of accidents that used to kill my friends in high school, and anybody in my age group who grew up in rural or small town Ontario can open your yearbook and point to the friends who died in car accidents. The sort of things that killed them don't even hurt people now. There's more cars in the road. They're going faster. People are still having accidents. They're just not dying. We dealt with the delivery vehicle. When we deal with impure water, we dealt with the delivery vehicle. How do you get the toxins out of a water system, the impurities, the things that were making people sick? We did the same with the food supply. We did the same with pharmaceuticals. We did it with airplanes. We did it with children's toys. We have workplace machinery, building standards. What's the rate of death in fires now compared to 50 or 100 years ago? So on so many of these topics, we have done such a great job. And it's the sort of stuff that Steven Pinker talks about in his wonderful book, Enlightenment Now. If we use the principles of the Enlightenment, if we use science and reason and humanism, if we seek truth, we can solve all sorts of problems. And the impact can be so incredible. And one of the interesting things about something like cigarette smoking is that the problem is the delivery system. Again, just like going back, water isn't a bad thing. Contaminated water is. If your delivery system is putting contaminants in the water, if it's poisoning it with lead, if it's putting in disease-causing agents, that's your delivery system. Deal with it. And the thing about something like water, you give people a clean supply, and you can take a big cause of death and disease, and you can reduce it dramatically, like almost to the point that you get rid of any problem, and you do it fairly quickly, because water is something where people make a decision every day, or several times a day, where they're going to get their water. Now, something like automobiles, that's much harder, because you come up with a safety feature, but if somebody just bought a car, they might not buy another car for 10 years. So there's a delay between when the technology allows a reduction in risk and when you accomplish something. Well, think of that in terms of people using nicotine, because it's like water. They're making purchase decisions every day, sometimes more than once a day. If you give them viable alternatives, and you give them information about those alternatives, if you empower them to make better decisions, you can see a tremendous rate of change. And we have. So even with only one viable alternative to cigarettes on the market in Japan, a heated tobacco product, even without the government doing things to try to facilitate people moving to this product, just making it available, cigarette sales in the first quarter of this year are down by 46.5% compared to 6 years earlier. I mean, that in Japan, a country that we used to consider to be intractable in terms of smoking. In Norway, adopting the snus product in Sweden, a very, very low risk alternative to cigarettes, saw cigarette sales fall by half in just 10 years. Substitution effects. And again, isn't that what we've seen with all these other products and services? Substitution effects. Give people a safer car. Give people a safer workplace. Give people buildings that are less likely to fall down or catch on fire. Give kids toys that aren't going to choke them, aren't going to catch on fire and kill them. We have done this so many times. And when I look at the history of what we've been through on nicotine, we really didn't know, at least when I got involved, it wasn't well known that the nicotine wasn't the problem. And it wasn't well known what you could do as an alternative. Now, that's despite the fact that Professor Michael Russell in the UK, in his work in the mid-1970s, had proven this, that nicotine is the reason people would smoke, but the tar, the smoke, was the reason they were dying. So what we had was a toxic delivery system. Again, like people getting their water from a toxic supply. And it took a while for us to try to understand this, but again, as a lawyer, as I start looking at that information, to think, this is the single biggest piece of information, the single biggest breakthrough we could ever have in trying to tackle our leading cause of preventable death. Because it isn't the thing that people are looking for, the nicotine, that's killing them. It's the delivery system, and it's possible to have an alternative. And at the time, the public knowledge about being able to have these alternatives just wasn't there. And there's this wonderful line from a book from about 1970 by Robert Serino called "Don't Blame the People," that said, people can only make as good a decision as the information available to them allows. And it's simply unfair to fail to give them the information they need to make an informed decision and then hold them responsible for having made bad decisions. And that's what we were doing. So as I learned about things like Swedish snus, that here's a product that in Sweden was replacing a tremendous number of cigarettes. It was giving Sweden the lowest rates of tobacco-related illness in the European Union. It was working. It was substitution effects. And again, as a lawyer, because I've also been involved in litigation against cigarette companies, the ability to sue companies for making an unreasonably hazardous product is really strong. That would probably be the best case we could ever have in going after the companies to force them to change. You know that there's safer ways to provide what your consumers are looking for. So it's like having a car that has no safety features. If legally you could find a way to get that in the market, then through litigation you'd be driven into bankruptcy because it's unreasonably hazardous. Cigarettes are unreasonably hazardous. Except the cigarette companies keep being protected. So after doing actually years of work preparing for cases to go after the tobacco companies, it was the supposed health groups that got in the way by denying that there was any difference in risk. About 15 years ago, I testified in front of the US Congress, a couple of committees, on the difference in risk between smokeless tobacco and cigarettes. And just to be clear, there's a huge difference in risk. Cigarettes are probably in the range of 50 times as hazardous as the sort of smokeless tobacco sold in the United States and Canada. And just before I testified, the US Surgeon General, like the top public health official in the United States, testified. And he said, no matter what you hear today, I want to assure you that there is no evidence that any smokeless tobacco product is any less hazardous than a cigarette. The US Surgeon General. And that was backed by US health groups. And since Maria already used the word bullshit, I won't, but I'm thinking it, that sort of misinformation kills people. Whatever the goal is, when you misinform people about something that can literally make a difference between life and death, that is horrendous. And it fit an ideological agenda. It fits an abstinence-only agenda. It's the same stuff as we will hear from various groups, particularly in the United States, historically on alcohol. We hear it on narcotics. We hear it on contraception. It's an abstinence-only view. It's not founded on science and reason and humanism. It's founded on moralism. It's founded on elitism. It's founded on ideological biases. But that sort of stuff causes huge harm. Because it isn't just that vaping has been attacked as an alternative. Any alternative that's come along to cigarettes throughout my career has been attacked. And I remember when I was first going to meetings with stock analysts in Manhattan, because I follow the industry very, very closely and talk to anybody who has any insights on what's going on in the tobacco industry, and found that there were analysts who believed that some of my anti-smoking colleagues were actually on the take from Philip Morris, because they couldn't otherwise understand why they kept protecting cigarettes. And I was in the embarrassing situation having to say, no, I've known these people for a long time. They're doing that for free. They're doing it. They're attacking any alternative because of this abstinence-only view. So what you're experiencing with vaping is no different than what we've experienced historically with smokeless tobacco. Only about 1 in 10 Americans believe that any smokeless tobacco product is less hazardous than a cigarette. That kills people. There's millions of Americans who are dual users of smokeless tobacco and cigarettes. They don't know there's a difference in risk, that they should switch to just one. When Star Scientific came out with tobacco lozenges, compressed tobacco lozenges, very low nitrosamine, and the company was backed by the former drug czar of the United States and the former assistant drug czar, people who had huge credentials in harm reduction dealing with issues like opioids. No connection to cigarette companies. And they were viciously attacked. They were driven out of business. Not by cigarette companies where they presented a real challenge, but by anti-tobacco people who just don't want anybody using nicotine. Again, here was a huge opportunity, but it's the same as we saw with snus in Sweden. It was developed by a Swedish Match, the state monopoly on tobacco products in Sweden, the same time as a sister company, because they had major ownership from the same government entity, named Volvo, was trying to deal with automobile harm reduction. And they were very Swedish. They just said, it appears that this is causing injury and death to fellow Swedes. What can we do? Let's be pragmatic. So Volvo came out with things like 3-point seatbelts and running lights and sidebar constraints and rear-facing car seats and various other things that revolutionized the car business. And Swedish Match did something that was potentially far greater in terms of health impact. They moved to a non-combustion tobacco product, one where there was a history in Sweden, but they decided, how do we move people back to this? How do we use policy? How do we use differential taxation? How do we get information so people are less likely to smoke cigarettes? If they're going to use tobacco, if they're going to use nicotine, they use snus instead. And as I say, the breakthrough is incredible, where parts of Sweden where they've reached what we would consider smoke-free status. The smoking rate's under 5%. The disease rates associated with tobacco and nicotine use are way lower than you'd find anywhere else. And the response to that? The European Union banned snus. They allow cigarettes to be sold. They banned snus. So did various other countries. They forced it out of the market. India, where I'm going to be speaking later, a few hours from now, there's about 200 million people who are using oral tobacco products that are toxic. There's also 100 million people using cigarettes that are probably even more toxic. And when people tried to introduce snus to India, they were driven out of the market by anti-tobacco people. And you've got to really think this one through to say, what is their goal? What are they trying to do? And having worked with NGOs and funded NGOs and mentored NGOs and all my career, I think there's a lot of people who are going off on tangents. It's a personal quest, it's a moral quest, it's an ideological thing, but they're not actually focusing on the topic that they're supposed to be working on, at least not pragmatically trying to solve the problem. If we do that, we accomplish great things. When you when you attack any alternative to a cigarette and you think that somehow you're attacking the tobacco industry, you're missing the boat. Also, if you look at anything that causes death, injury, or disease, logically, there's only 4 things you can do to try to reduce the toll. So, you pick anything, whether it be, when my son decided he was going to play goalie in hockey, or my daughter deciding to go parachute jumping, or the people who are using IV drugs, or people who are into car racing, or using motorcycles, or, you just name it, anything where there's a risk. You can do things to try to get people to just never engage in that activity. You can do things to get people who are engaging in it to stop. You can do things to prevent harm to other people from that activity. And you can do things to reduce the risk for the people who are still going to engage in the activity. Logically, that's it. Those are the 4 things. And if you think of it, it's like a deck of cards with 4 suits, that there's a synergy there. And if you decide that you're not going to use one of those 4 things, it's like going into a poker tournament and saying, I never play spades. I'll use the other ones. Spades, no, don't like spades. A sign of the devil, probably. And so, well, sure, I had a royal flush in the last game, but it was spades. I folded. And to say, well, I could have had 4 of a kind, but one of them, damn it, was a spade. And you lose so much potential. So you say, if we can include things like risk reduction, to say, what about all those millions of people who are still using the product and the other things we're doing are not making an impact? You can make an impact. What about when you're trying to reduce public smoking? To be able to say there's a viable option for the people who would otherwise be smoking in this area? What if you're wanting to increase tobacco taxes as a way to reduce cigarette consumption, but the argument comes up about how regressive this is, how it harms many disadvantaged people? Well, those disadvantaged people have access to something else. There's so many ways that this can work together that you can have a truly comprehensive plan, rather than the things all through my career we kept calling comprehensive plans, but they were simply not comprehensive. So we have the ability to do this, and in fact, we've tried. Back in the 80s, the Tobacco Products Control Act, passed in 1988, had a harm reduction section, 17 sub 1, that I thought was brilliant, only in part because I drafted it, that said that if you had a product that could be shown to be less hazardous than an existing tobacco product and would be used in place of an existing tobacco product, the minister could give you an exemption to various of the restrictions we put on the marketing of cigarettes. It would give an advantage to these products so that people would have an incentive to move from the more risky to the less risky products. Just like so many places did on things like moving from leaded to unleaded gasoline. Right? We do this stuff over and over again to try to say, how about you adjust the taxes so the unleaded gas doesn't cost as much as the leaded gas? Let's give people an incentive to move. We'll combine that with education about why you want the unleaded. How did we move from so many other things that were hazardous to less hazardous? What sort of incentives? The sorts of things that we're seeing happening now and trying to move people to electric cars from combustion cars. Again, combustion's the problem. How do we deal with things like this? We keep having the examples, and we're in an area where too often we ignore those things. We ignore the things that have actually worked. And I think we get confused about first order and second order points. So for instance, if we're trying to deal with something like COVID, and we have the ability to have effective vaccines, that can be really, really important in dealing with the disease. We've just been dealing with that. But if somebody says, what if? What if a vaccine harms a child? Surely you value children. Well, that's called an unintended consequence. We deal with that constantly to say, what if you put safety features in automobiles and it causes somebody to drive even more quickly, even more recklessly? What happens if you come out with a pharmaceutical product that can take away the pain for a terminally ill cancer patient, but a teenager gets the drug and uses it at a party? What if? What if you straighten out a road, but it means fewer people are going through that village where they used to be running over children, but also stopping to buy hamburgers? Does the hamburger place go out of business? We deal with unintended consequences all the time. You know, we deal with it in our ongoing lives. And that's a matter of saying, what's the priority? Deal with the priority. So if the priority is we're trying to reduce that toll of the 48,000 deaths a year, focus on that. Those are the people who are going to be dying, you know, this year, next year, the following year. You know, all the people are going to be dying in the next 20 years. You know, when we're talking, you know, close to 1 million Canadians. They're already smoking. And we have really good evidence that an awful lot of them aren't going to be able to get off nicotine. Are we going to sacrifice them? And if so, do you sacrifice them over a hypothetical? A hypothetical that we can actually deal with. So not only have we seen things like the whole scare story about gateway effects being as established as what we've seen on things like trying to deal with harm reduction on illicit drugs, meaning, no, you see an association, you know, people who use marijuana are also more likely to use heroin. That doesn't mean the marijuana caused the heroin use. We dismiss gateway effects on things like that. Our government dismisses it. You know, that's common liability. People who take risks. But we also have the ability to use policy to prevent a gateway effect from happening. So when people say, I'm afraid that some young people might start using vaping products, and then they'll switch to cigarettes. Even though we have the ability to ensure that cigarettes cost much more, that they're fully informed. And so what you're telling me is you think that there's people who are going to say, I'd much rather use a product that costs a lot more money, kills me, makes me stink, turns me into a social pariah. You know, is that their view of the intelligence of our teenagers? Have we seen this anywhere else? You know, what happened in Norway when they introduced snus? Was it a gateway effect for smoking? Well, smoking rates among young women went from, I think, 25% to 1%. We're seeing it replicated now. You know, what's happened in Japan as people have switched to heated tobacco products? We haven't seen an increase in people taking up those products and moving to smoking. You know, we've seen a continued decline in total tobacco consumption. And indeed, I think one of the reasons that cigarette companies are, the reason that they've got involved in vaping is they've been forced to by competition. They don't want to be a Kodak, but they're certainly not going to do anything to facilitate it because they make way more money off cigarettes than they do, they possibly could off new technology. Cigarettes have been a near monopoly for a long time with profit margins unlike anything that you can get in any other legal business. And all that profit falls to the bottom line. It isn't like you have a lot of R&D expenditures if you're in the cigarette business. As the former CEO of one of the companies said to me, the biggest research and development challenge we ever had was how do you build a wheelbarrow large enough to take home the money at the end of the day? That's very different than technology that's rapidly changing. And anybody who's familiar with what happened to things like the mobile phone business would know that if you're involved in old technology, you got to be very careful what's going to happen to you as technology changes. Companies tend to get blown away. You also have to deal with the opposition, and we're all facing this, but I thought also to put this into context, it's nothing new. So Professor Juma, the late Professor Juma from Harvard University, who is an expert on innovation, in a wonderful book called Innovation and Its Enemies, says, debates over new technology are part of a long history of social discourse over new products. Claims about the promise of new technology are at times greeted with skepticism, vilification, or outright opposition, often dominated by slander, innuendo, scare tactics, conspiracy theories, and misinformation. The assumption that new technologies carry unknown risks guides much of the debate. This is often amplified to levels that overshadow the dangers of known risks. The focus tends to be on the unintended risks of new products rather than on the unintended benefits. Another characteristic of the debate is the assumption that adopting new technologies comes with new risks. Well, doing nothing is risk-free. As a result, most communication efforts do not include the risks of inaction. He wasn't talking about vaping, he was talking about technology in general. We've gone through it again and again and again. Whether it's bicycles, refrigeration, or pesticides, farm machinery, I mean, again and again and again. This is just what happens. So that's the fight that we're in History shows that eventually science, reason, and humanism comes to the fore. Anything we can do to speed that up means fewer people that we're sitting with while they're dying. Thank you.
I'm just going to tippy-toe. Thank you, David. And if you guys have any questions and the people online, put them in the chat, but not the people in the room. Put them on the little piece of paper that we have there. Have your questions ready, and we'll do a Q&A with all our speakers. I also just want to say is that recently I saw this quote in a press release that someone tried to justify that vaping had nothing to do with the rapid decline of smoking. And their suggestion was, although the smoking rate has continued to decline, analysis shows this is largely because smokers die. That was the argument. Instead of looking into it, so again, I can't stress how important it is to challenge these opinions, because information is going out there without any links, it's opinion. And we all have opinions. It's just time to start talking about facts and real lives. And speaking of real lives, oh, this tippy-toe thing is hard. Our next guest, she's a joy. I've known her since 2014, 2015, when we stood out in the freezing cold in Ontario to fight a flavor ban. And after smoking for almost 40 years, Mary and Bert switched to exclusive vaping 8 years ago after her first puff on an apple flavored vape. She discovered activism when her name was selected as a speaker during committee hearings in the Ontario Parliament, and she realized how much fun it was to argue with people who have more power than knowledge on the issue. Her chief hobby now is writing impassioned pleas in emails to politicians and sarcastic comments on anti-vaping website. Welcome, Marian. Is this all good for you?
Thank you, Maria. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. I never thought that I would admit this publicly, but I am a senior and a baby boomer. I'm part of the generation that worked to change the world. We wanted to channel all the energies in the universe and create a world that was full of love and joy and creativity. And we were loud, and we were determined, and we wanted to be heard, and we were heard. And I'm saying that because over the last couple of years, people like me have been pushed to the side and silenced and ignored. In all of the discussions on vaping, no one has considered our needs for a moment. In fact, those of us who vape are being punished for the mischief and the sins of other people's grandchildren. The nicotine caps and the flavor bans and the high taxes are not going to stop kids from being kids, but they're certainly going to make our lives more miserable. We had a saying when I was younger: don't trust anyone over 30. Well, now we're saying don't trust anybody under 60. People who talk about vaping are, young whippersnappers who probably never smoked and definitely never vaped. And yet they call themselves experts and give sage and stern advice to the press about nicotine poisoning and gateways and popcorn lung. And they seem quite happy with the predictions that many of us will return to smoking if restrictions come into force. That appears to have happened in Nova Scotia, but I have yet to read any official word of regret or an admission that these experts might have made a mistake. So, I am saying that it's time for seniors who vape to put aside our knitting and our online solitaire games and go back to what we did best, making sure that our voices are heard. I am focusing on seniors here, but I really mean every adult who has stopped smoking by switching to vaping. Now, those of us who are retired need a purpose for our lives and our time, and the health of people who are still smoking is certainly a worthy effort. So, the most important thing we can do, I think, is communicate with our elected officials. Now, it's not that difficult. We're no longer in the times of fountain pens and envelopes and stamps. Baby boomers invented the internet, remember? Even though our brains were probably addled with the nicotine that we consumed in our adolescence. All we have to do is write, "I don't smoke. Vaping saved my life. Sincerely," click send. That's all you need to do. If that's all you're comfortable with, that's fine. You've marked your X on the ballot. We did this with the postcards about the proposed flavor ban. 24,000 of us sent in postcards. Of course, they counted them as one, but those 24,000 votes were acknowledged and are on the official record. They were not wasted. You can write more than this if you feel like it. It's good to tell your own personal story, your smoking to vaping story, and your experience, and make it clear what your opinion is, what you want. And once you have a nice text, spread it wide. All you have to do is change the to field and the polite salutation and send it to any number of targets you can. You can edit the text to suit the current crisis. The flavor ban is up in the air, the tax hike is looming, and who knows what other ideology they'll come up with. No, that's not ideology, it's idiocy they'll come up with. I don't want to wear my glasses because I'm vain. But keep hammering. It costs nothing except a few seconds or minutes. And don't get discouraged. About half the time, you won't receive anything back. If you're lucky, you may receive a form letter telling you how they value your opinion, and that's going to be followed by a blurb on dangers to youth and protecting youth, yada, yada, yada. If the target is your own representative, they may tell you that they have forwarded your message to somebody else. But don't be discouraged by any of these. If enough of us are doing it, we will make an impression. I found that I enjoyed doing this so much that I spread my wings a little and started writing things on Quora to try to stem the tide of misinformation there. And I also keep an eye out for Facebook postings on the sites of our major enemies, the NGOs like the Lung Association, Heart and Stroke, Cancer Society, Physicians for a Smoke-Free Canada. When I see something that was obviously written by a PR hack on contract, I comment quite gleefully. The Lung Association actually congratulated me last year on being one of their top supporters. Computer algorithms don't understand sarcasm. So there are actually quite a few people who do this faithfully. Some send links to reliable information. Some just argue. I tend to mock politely. And all of these approaches are valid. And let other readers of the site know that these experts might not be as expert as they think. The really important thing is to keep up your fighting spirit and never assume that you aren't making an impression. I'm going to tell you a story about my experience. Late last year, I sent an email to the Federal Minister of Health. My automatic acknowledgement arrived immediately, but that was all I heard until about the beginning of March. Then I received an email from someone in Health Canada. It started out with how my opinion is valued and then launched into a blurb about protecting youth. So I sighed and put the email in my folder of other blurbs about protecting youth without finishing it. And a week or so later, David Sweener contacted me and urged me to respond to this email. So it took me a bit of searching, but I retrieved it, and then I read to the end. And there, at the bottom of the page, the second page actually, was an added paragraph inviting me to contact the sender for further discussion. I responded immediately, and the next day was sitting in a Zoom session with two people from Health Canada who wanted my help in establishing an official panel of adults who had quit smoking by switching to vaping. Can you imagine? Every email I've sent, every comment I've made has been with it, and I got a catch in my throat. With a couple of Facebook postings, and in 2 days, I had a small group of from Ontario to Vancouver, and already we're in motion. Health Canada has developed a team to work with us and has suggested an initial online meeting next week, so to talk about the possibilities. So here, the adults vaping movement, and we've only just begun. I'm still trying to recruit people from Quebec and the Maritimes. Unfortunately, the provincial regulations in these provinces have cut a lot of the communication lines for adult vapors. Many of the vape shops have closed, and the people have been forced to look after themselves and find their own ways of staying smoke-free. And there isn't much activism in the black market or do-it-yourself brewing or in foreign imports. Another group I'm trying to reach is the Indigenous Communities, because many of them are smokers and they need vaping and they need tobacco harm reduction. The ones who have switched to smoking need encouragement to join a group that understands them and represents them. Now, I don't have any direct contacts, but I have sent messages to people whom I have seen in online papers about harm reduction. And I've written to a group that provides housing for Indigenous women and to relatives of friends. And I've even given a letter to one of my neighbors who still smokes and asked him to give it to someone on the reserve when he goes up to pick up his next supply of cigarettes. You know, someone praised me recently and spoke a bit disparagingly about other pro-vaping groups and people. And I was quite offended because I'm, shucks, modest, but also I have so much respect for what other people are doing. And I said, I'm just the pom-poms and the marching band in this parade. But in writing this, I realized that It's some pom-poms and the marching bands that get the attention of the crowd and draw them to the parade. So I'm just hoping that the Health Canada group grows bigger and bigger, and then the Canadian policy on vaping will travel to the beat of a different drum, our drum. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you, Marion. Like, I just started crying when you started crying over there. But which is true, because Marion does not, I think we all know this, and I think most people know this, but I'm just going to say it. She does not stop because someone doesn't respond. That motivates her to keep having the conversation till they do respond. And if there's anything that we've learned, is read the bottom of the email that you get from any government official, because there's no assuming makes, you guys all know that saying, right? Okay, so we have one last speaker today, and then after that, again, we will have a Q&A. He's coming in all the way from Victoria, BC, 3 hours behind, so we are the future for him. And he is a professor and one of our advisors here at Rights for Vapors. He is funny and witty, and you know what? I'm looking forward to hear what Professor Chris Lalonde has to say, and we're going to zoom him in on that screen. Or that's, anyways. Hi, Chris. We're just going to work on your audio just really quickly.
Do you need me to do anything?
You just did it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and you have 20 minutes, and we're going to hand it over to you now.
Well, thank you, Maria, and good morning, everyone. I take it it's still morning, even in Ottawa. Thanks for organizing this, and thanks for inviting me. Maria asked me for a title, and I couldn't come up with anything. So I started making some little scribbled notes, and at the top of the page, I wrote, "If they have a plan, it's a bad one." And Maria just wrote back right away and said, "I love it." Okay, so that's my title. I'm zooming in from Coast and Strait Salish territory on Vancouver Island, where I've lived now most of my life. And so I want to begin by acknowledging with respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose territory I live and work, the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples, whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. I managed to join, I guess, a little bit late. I heard the end of David and then Marion, and I'm sure that everything that I have to say has been said better and wiser by those two than I ever could. But I'm going to sort of tell you what I think from my perspective. So I'm a psychologist with an interest in youth health and youth development. And I'm particularly interested in how we adults as a society make policies that create the environment where children and youth develop. And so if we get it right, great. And if we get it wrong, really bad things can happen. So I want to now do what we in psychology call a thought experiment. And we like thought experiments in psychology because you can do them at home in a big comfy chair and you don't need ethics approval and stuff. So I want you to think about this seriously for a minute. Let's imagine that magically you wake up tomorrow and you are now running Health Canada. So you are now the head of Health Canada. You're supposed to protect and promote the health of Canadians. What would you do? Well, it seems to me, at least, the first thing you would do is say, look, we got to make a list of things that are killing Canadians. Okay, we make a list. What are the top 5, 10, whatever things that are killing our citizens? And then, okay, let's break that down and let's try and create a plan to deal with each of those things. So if you look at what's killing Canadians, what are the top 3, 4, 5 causes of death of Canadians? Number 1, ischemic heart disease. Number 2, lung cancer. Number 3, stroke. 4 and 5 go back and forth between COPD and Alzheimer's. So those are the things that are killing us. And if you're running Health Canada, your number one job should be, okay, we got to deal with those things, right? If you look at what are the risk factors that lead to those deaths, okay, so you can break them down into what are called metabolic risks and environmental risks and behavioral risks. And the number one cause of death and disability in Canada is tobacco. Okay. Number one, far and away. So if the top causes are heart disease, stroke, COPD, what are the risk factors for that? Tobacco. And they don't mean pipes and cigars, big premium fat cigars that, you know, monopoly players smoke, bankers smoke, because they don't inhale the smoke, right? It's inhaling burning leaves that causes 48,000 Canadians to die from tobacco related causes. So your number one job should be dealing with that, right? Or you'd think. So what have we tried to do? Well, we've taken the WHO's Empower thing. We're going to monitor tobacco use and prevention policies. We're going to try and protect people from tobacco smoke. We're going to offer help, right, to quit tobacco use. We're going to issue lots of scary, scary warnings about the dangers of tobacco. We're going to enforce bans on advertising and promotion and sponsorship, and we're going to raise taxes. Okay, so we've been doing that for a very, very long time. And sure enough, since the mid 60s, right, after the first Surgeon General, after the UK put out their first report and said, look, smoking's bad. It's going to give you lung cancer. You're going to die. Smoking rates have been falling relentlessly since then. So they went from like half the adult population smoking down to around about 15%. Okay, so it's going down. It keeps going down. Could we do a better job of getting it to go down faster? Sure, we could if we just did the right things, but we don't. So in Canada and the US, especially now, they have lumped together vaping and combustible tobacco and just call it tobacco use. Okay. Interestingly, they don't include nicotine patches and gums and pharmaceutical products in that category. It's just tobacco and vaping. And they don't care what, especially young people, are vaping. It doesn't have to be regular e-liquid. It can be THC. And we all know the history of the EVALI nightmare in the United States. And that is still, despite finally the CDC saying, nope, it was illegal THC. It had nothing to do with vaping, nicotine, e-liquids. It's still out there. It's still got legs. It's still driving public policy all around our country. And it's wrong. And, you know, you ought to see Health Canada correcting that and saying, look, we know, we've already said switching exclusively to vaping is better than continuing to smoke. Even though we've said that, we still kind of toss in a little dash of Valley here and there just to keep parents panicking about what their kids are doing. So now we're at this interesting crossroads where Health Canada is supposed to be kind of reevaluating their policies. And so they've reached out for public consultation, which if any of you in the room have looked at these documents, you ought to be kind of rightly horrified about how they're written and prepared and disseminated. I won't go into that at the moment, but the big thing is they've lumped together combustible tobacco and vaping, and they have demonized nicotine in a way that I think is just so transparently untrue that you would think everyone would see through it. So there's recent reports that vaping is better for pregnant women. Okay, well, this is anathema to the anti-tobacco harm people, because they keep claiming that, you know, if you smoke, nicotine is going to rot your brain. And we've all seen the FDA commercials about this, with brain worms crawling around young people's faces and depression sticks and all of these really over the top reefer madness kinds of campaigns that are meant to sustain this moral panic that is unjustifiable. And it's unjustifiable for a whole bunch of reasons. One, it was never true. Everybody points back to data from 2018, 2019, where there was a spike in youth vaping. No doubt about it, right? But it was all based on ever use or past 30-day use. People never break down how often is the teenager using a vaping product. If they're using it once a week, every other week, once a month, I'm not so sure we should be concerned about that, given all the other dangerous things that young people do, right? Unprotected sex, drinking, binge drinking, driving while intoxicated, all the millions of things that kids do that are orders of magnitude more dangerous than vaping ever could be, even if they incessantly vaped. That must be because nicotine is as addictive as heroin. So now nicotine becomes the devil here. And my worry is that this is only going to accelerate. So they're going to decide, wait a minute, nicotine is a stimulant, so we should loop that together with coffee and Red Bull and all those other stimulants. And we should talk about youth stimulant use and the crisis and panic that should now immediately ensue about this. But we don't. But I have this horrid feeling that it's coming. So if even Health Canada says switching exclusively to vaping is better, how could they make that happen? If you're running Health Canada, how would you actually make that happen? Okay. Well, one, you can keep raising taxes on tobacco, fine. Hasn't stopped young people from starting smoking for the last 50 years, but hey, it's fine. We need taxes. We got to, you know, fix our highways and collect the garbage and do all the things and create a social safety net and all that good stuff. But the big promise of vaping, and I'll bet David talked about this, the big promise here is that at the moment, there's still a big price differential. It's way cheaper for adults who've been smoking for 10 or 20 or 30 years. The ones who are really in danger of dying of tobacco-related diseases, it's way cheaper for them to vape than it is to smoke. Now, if you increase the cost of vaping, if you frighten people into thinking it's just as harmful as smoking, then you decrease the likelihood that long-term adult smokers, the ones that are really in danger, are actually going to take that up. Okay, so let's increase the cost. Let's decrease the attractiveness. There was a news story the other day here in British Columbia that BC has quietly done away with plain packaging for electronic cigarettes. And you think, well, I'm not sure I understand that, because A, you can only buy them in adult verified shops. You got to be an adult just to get in the door. You can't usually see the products. So I'm not sure how alluring a package would have to be to draw a young person with fake ID into a vape shop and buy that particular product. It makes no sense. It's like cigarettes. They're all behind sort of closed doors. Now, you could imagine that you walk into your local whatever grocery store and you buy a package of cigarettes and it's gleamingly, I don't know, white, red, blue, whatever color it is. And it's like a magnet. It just draws young people to want to smoke because you have this right or red or blue box in your hand. I'm not sure I buy that. I think people have gone overboard on the supposed power of advertising. And sure, we could talk about branding and shaping and all of that sort of stuff, but it's not as though the mere sight of an e-cigarette in some brightly packaged box or a package of cigarettes is the and only cause of people smoking. Okay, so we can increase the price, we can hide them. You've got to have frosted windows in vape shops in British Columbia now. We can increase the tax. Okay, and I've been beating this drum for a long time. I'm not opposed to taxes. We need taxes to run a fair and equitable society. But so they raised the tax 20% here in British Columbia. And I thought, well, okay, what are you going to do with that money? Is it going to go into smoking prevention, youth education? And we could quibble about, the details of what would be good or bad about those. Nope, goes straight into general revenue. Okay. So all you've done is increase the barriers to adult smokers switching to vaping. They look at it and say, well, yeah, it's a little bit cheaper, but it's not that cheap. Then you say, well, what we really need to do to deal with this youth epidemic is we need to lower the nicotine level in vaping products. Okay, sure, maybe that would work for youth. I kind of doubt it. But what it will do is you take someone who's been smoking for 30 or 40 years and they're smoking a pack and a half a day or 2 packs or whatever, and they take a puff on an 18 milligram e-cigarette and they just, in that single moment, they decide, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work for me. I'm not getting what I get from a cigarette. Thanks, tried it, going back to my stinky cigarettes. And I think I was like Marion. I was one of those instant quitters. Did a bunch of research, went out, bought this little starter kit, put it together, took a puff, and I thought, for the first time after trying everything, after 42 years of smoking, I think this is going to work. And it did. I hadn't had a puff of a cigarette in 8-9 years. And so that was because it worked. There was a physical reaction to this, thinking, I think this finally is what's going to work for me. So let's lower the nicotine, increase the price, and let's get rid of any kind of flavor that people might like. Okay, so we could argue about flavors, but humans like flavors. That's just how we're built. And most people who switch to e-cigarettes initially want an e-cigarette that tastes exactly like whatever brand of cigarettes I've been smoking for 30 years. I want it to taste like this. Well, it turns out there is nothing in an e-cigarette flavor that actually tastes like burning tobacco leaves. Nothing. The closest I could ever get was something that sort of smelled like an unlit cigarette, tasted terrible. And so that one went by the wayside. And then, because your taste buds start to recover, you try something else. People talked about apple, root beer, fruits, desserts, all kinds of things. But what you're trying to do is get away from the taste of tobacco. And if you make that harder to do, right? If you say you can't have any flavors, and worse than that, we're going to get rid of flavors that people might like, not because there's anything dangerous in these flavors, but because people might like them. Okay, that's the worst sort of public health crime that you could commit that I can even conceive. But that seems to be where the government, Health Canada, is heading. And if you or I were the head of Health Canada, I hope we'd make sure that that does not happen. Don't make it more expensive. Don't make it less attractable. Don't make it less accessible. Sure, kids might try stuff. Kids try stuff. But they generally are experimenting. Youth vaping has fallen off. The fad is over. It's done. Youth aren't smoking. The latest Stats Canada numbers say the numbers are unreliable because they're so low. Okay, well, hooray, right? They're not smoking and they're not vaping anymore. Seems like there's nothing to see here, folks. Move along and let's target those long-term adult smokers who are at the highest risk of actually developing disabilities or dying from smoking. That ought to be the number one job of Health Canada. And I'm sorry to say I'm not seeing that in what they're doing. Okay, I threatened Maria that I would just get on here and rant, and I can feel it coming. So I'm just going to thank you very much, and I'm going to stop there. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Chris. You didn't rant. You shared your soul with us. And that's something that's consistent, is that people who used to smoke and found vaping, it was a solution. And that solution is why we have so many vape shops that are owned by people who used to smoke. And before, sorry, I was going to say I'm not going to get emotional, but then I wouldn't be me. So it's hard to do what we do. It's hard to own a shop and advocate at the exact same time because people don't understand. I can't even count how many times I was called big vape, big tobacco, and I have ulterior motives. But yeah, I do have ulterior motives because unlike them, I meet people every single day who are so grateful and thankful and unfortunately fearful that their lives as someone who is smoke-free will go away. These are also people who don't have a lot of money. We're looking at people who smokers tend to come from marginalized communities that have lower incomes. So taxations that are threatening at $14 for a 30 ml bottle, you're damn straight I'm going to sit there and fight it as much as I can. I brought back the postcards, and I don't care the fact that I own a shop, but I'm handing them out. Because if we don't fight for the people whose lives we've changed, what are we really doing? And to say that I have ulterior motives or any other shop owner has ulterior motives or someone on the board of the CVA or VITA have ulterior motives, it's so short-sighted. It is such a quick fix to try and get their argument across. We see the people whose lives are changing. Our conversations need to be part of every single conversation that is happening about regulation. We're not tainted. We're the people that people trust. And unfortunately, the regulations since TVPA have made that much more difficult. We can go to prison for telling someone that vaping is safer than smoking without showing the full study. 18 months. And I heard it's kind of a nice prison. They wouldn't put you in the hard one. So I don't know. But it's also a $500,000 fine. But if we were to actually sell the product while saying that to a kid in our shop, the fine would only be $3,000. So if we want to help kids not vape, remove access, it's really about enforcement. It's really about having conversations with everybody. And it's really about not excluding anyone from it. Because we're not tobacco and we can't fit that square peg into a round hole. Did I say that right? It's different and we need to start thinking about this as different. So that being said, in my little spiel, I would like to bring up our panelists over here, and we're going to do some Q&As, and I hope everyone here has questions for them. I'm relying on you guys as the interactive part of this presentation. Where is Ian? Okay, and you guys can sit there. Oh, and we will. And we will. And for those of you old enough, Sally Jesse or Phil Donahue. Oh, at the podium. Okay. So who has the first question? Come on, guys. I got to move over here. Okay. Who has the first question? Anybody? Okay. Richard Shaw.
Why not? I only put my hand up because nobody else did.
Okay. That's no problem. We all know on the Zoom calls you have good questions.
I can speak loud.
Thanks. Professor Sweener, obviously we're in a state right now where the government's lost its mind, or it just doesn't make sense for the majority of us. I'm wondering how many years before you think we might see a turn by the government to start listening to science and stop worrying about the money that they're promised from big tobacco and get on board. Are you guessing 1 year, 3 years, 5? Thank you. First question. There you go.
Yeah, I think the people in this room and the people watching live or get this later can influence that. If we look at this historically, there's lags between what we know from science and what happens in terms of policy. I mean, it's always that way. It has to be that way. Look at what's happened with narcotics. It really wasn't very long ago that the view was that, if you're using opioids, we're going to put you in jail, damn it, and we're going to punish you, and there's no way we're going to allow things like safe injection sites or even think about a clean supply or, anything other than punishment, because, of course, if we don't have an abstinence-only view, then every swing voting soccer mom and their kids are going to become heroin addicts. We're just not going to allow this. And we now have Health Canada using public health in that area, the way they have on issues of cannabis, the way we've seen progress on issues of mental health, where they're using public health principles of saying, we need to meet people where they are. We need to understand their lived experience. We need to empower them to make better decisions about their own health. The things that are in a document called the Ottawa Charter of Public Health or Health Promotion that's been adopted by the World Health Organization. That's what you do when you're trying to do public health, and we're doing it in these other areas. One of the advantages we have is that it's the same part of Health Canada that's accepted taking a rational, science-based, humanistic approach on things like opioids and cannabis and mental health, that's taking this approach of stigmatizing and ignoring and misinforming people on issues of nicotine. So there's an inconsistency there, and I think there's a big incentive for Health Canada to close it. Not only because so many people are dying unnecessarily because of nicotine policy, and they know that, and they can fight back against the abstinence-only people who are spreading misinformation. I think they've got an obligation to the people of Canada to do that. I think that being pushed on this, including by people whose lives have been saved by vaping, will help cause that to happen. And the alternative is that if they don't do that, that inconsistency is going to close in some way. And it may be a future government that says, hey, all this stigma and ignoring the people whose lives are at risk and paying no attention to their lived experience is the way to go. We're doing it on nicotine. We may as well do it again on narcotics. We may as well get back into stigma on mental health. Why not? So let's close the gap in a way that makes sense, that acts like the Enlightenment happened, rather than run the risk that we end up with absolutely crazy policies once again on those other areas.
Thank you. I don't know which mic's on. Got it? Thank you. Okay, here's a really good question. Anyone, you guys can all answer it. One of you can answer it. But how do we get the medical community, like the doctors, to see the light? I know personally about 1.5 years ago in Port Hope, Ontario, Northumberland Hills Hospital diagnosed 4 people with popcorn lung. 4 people, sent them home, told them you have popcorn lung because you vape and you need to stop vaping quickly and go back to smoking. All of them returned to smoking and then got the diagnosis they had pneumonia. So I think what the real good question is how do we get the medical community to see the light? Because that's more than us advocate. I can show up there every day, but they're not going to listen to me.
I can start quickly, but then hand it over. If we look at the history of what's happened on these other issues, whether it be the rights to contraception, the opioid reform, dealing with fentanyl, mental health, It isn't the doctors, and it hasn't been on tobacco control. Medical associations take a lot of credit for what we've done in reducing smoking. They did very little to deal with the problem. They were not primary actors in the advocacy we were doing to get policy. Neither were things like Heart and Stroke or Lung Association. They come along to take credit for work others have done by and large. But it's individuals who push this. Who are the doctors who really led the way on reforming our policies on opioids? And there were a few, but it wasn't most of them. Most of them are still misinformed, just like the rest of the public, just like we see on nicotine. So there will be some leaders, and we see that among some physicians who really pay attention. But the leadership really comes from individuals, the people whose lives are at risk, the people with the lived experience.
Okay, and Ian and then Chris.
Yeah, am I getting, oh, here we go. Okay. I think information is critically important. I mean, I'm an economist, and economists are known for their reliance on the price mechanism to do wonderful things and incentivizing people to make particular kinds of choices. So in that regard, it is indeed important that taxes be kept low on the low-risk products. At the same time, differential tax policies are going to be much more effective if people are informed about the relative risks. Having lower taxes on less risky products will be more effective in incentivizing users of high-risk products to move to the low-risk products if people are made aware of the relative risks. And so I think information promotion is a really big task that Health Canada must face. I mean, I've put out this idea that, and I mentioned it in my talk, that instead of having negative messages on cigarette packs, maybe rather than just putting in small print, phone a helpline, maybe put a big message on one side of the tobacco pack which says, here are ways you can quit cigarettes and go to something that's much less risky. So information is critical, and I think Health Canada has a really serious job to undertake in that regard. The other thing is that what I have found very worrying is the degree to which the medical profession is either unwilling to get people to move to lower risk products, or the degree to which the medical profession seems to be unaware of the fact that some products are a much lower risk, carry a much lower risk than others. I read a couple of journal articles on physician awareness of relative risks, and when I read the summary of these articles put out by other people, I said, no. The questions being put to doctors can't be clear. It must be the case that the questions that they're being asked to answer are a bit muddied, and they're not really answering the question that they think they're asking. But when you read these studies and you see the clarity of the questions being posed, it's pretty worrying. So I don't know how Health Canada can work with doctors, or if it has the stomach to do that. But I think in all of this, information is critical. And I'm an economist. I believe in the price mechanism, but information is just absolutely vital to get out there to people.
Thank you. Chris, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, two things. First of all, I think if you were the head of Health Canada, your first job should be dispelling the myths. And one of them is the harm reduction myth, right? As Ian was just saying, that's the kind of fight we have to fight with doctors. The other thing is that a scary percentage of doctors believe cancer is caused by nicotine. Okay, it's not. That's just a simple one. Get that drilled into the heads of your GPs, and you knock down a huge barrier. But it's not being done. Health Canada has no plan, no mandate. Remember when the Act first came out, they were going to authorize certain things you could say, Maria, right? And they had some proposed stuff, and then crickets. We've heard nothing since 2018 about, well, what could I say as a vape shop owner to a potential customer about this? Nothing. The other one is, and I think this is a quote from David, but I'm not sure, but I'm going to attribute it to him anyway, because I think it's a great quote about why this is taking so long. Why are people not following the science, right? And he said something like, the opponents of tobacco harm reduction can't survive sustained exposure to reality forever. And I think that's true, right? The kind of data is just mounting everywhere. Anybody who claims that vaping doesn't, cause smoking cessation is just ignorant or flat out lying. And that is becoming increasingly clear. So how should we act on that, right? Well, we got to get rid of all the myths about nicotine in doctors and healthcare professionals' minds, number one. Number two is we got to create and sustain a vibrant sort of vaping industry as an alternative to smoking. And so far, there's been precious little leadership from Health Canada in making either of those things happen. And that ought to be job one for Health Canada. Not seeing it so far.
Thank you. Marion, did you want to?
Yeah, I did. Am I on? Am I on?
Elliot, we'll get you. Okay, you just keep talking. We'll get you on.
Okay. Yes, I agree with Chris. From what I have observed, doctors in general, GPs and, in the hospitals are not getting the required information from Health Canada about the relative risk. However, what I have noticed, baby boomers are now having a lot of experience with doctors and anesthesiologists and surgeons, and just nothing serious, just. But every time I've gone in, I've been asked several times on each trip about my smoking status, and I have told them, I smoked for almost 40 years. I quit 8 years ago because I switched to vaping, and they have all said, congratulations, that's wonderful, and have marked me down as a non-smoker. And I believe they do that because they see day to day people, the change in people who were smokers and when they become vapors. And so they actually see the evidence. My own doctor, when I told her I was switching, she was not very happy about it. I gave her information, and she did tell me about 5 years ago that she had been on a conference, and it did look as though there was something in it. And my last visit, she would rather I stopped, but she's happy that I'm not smoking, and she's quite happy with me in general. So my feeling about this is that the medical profession, the guys on the ground, I think they are ready to be educated, and they are learning just from their own observation. But it's unfortunate that those ones that have risen through the hierarchy of organizations and management and public relations, they're the ones who unfortunately are sending out the message. And that, I think, is the problem that needs to be corrected.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a question directly for you, Marion. Also, I just want to say we tend to always focus on what Health Canada has not done, but it's also important but we don't want to be like the other people that only focus on the negative. I think it's important to focus as well on a few things that have happened over the past 6 to 8 months. We had our first meeting with Health Canada, which I don't think any of us in this room or anywhere on these calls actually thought would happen. And then we're talking about this advisory group. So there are movements moving forward. So, Marion, what do you hope to accomplish with the advisory group?
Okay. I hope to accomplish learning about setting up Bell email groups and stuff like that so I can handle some of this. But I think we're well on the way. As I say, we've got half the country covered, and it's a small group, but I send out emails and I get responses from most of them. And yeah, I want it to be Canada-wide. I want it to represent, I want it, as I said, the Indigenous communities, and also the more, I can't think of the politically correct word, the LGBTQ and
Yeah.
the emotional, the whole people who are at risk from smoking. I want to get as many as them in, and I really want our voices to be heard, and I want this group to have a really good communication spirit with Health Canada, so that between us we can get the smoking rate down and the health of Canadians improved.
Thank
That's
you.
my hope.
Can I give everybody your email address?
Huh?
Can I give everyone your email address?
Sure, they can guess it.
Okay. So if you are interested, and I know there's always that one person from Nunavut that always responds to everything we
Yeah.
send to the government. So if you are on this call or you're watching it, reach out to Marianne Burt and just say, I am from Nunavut, because we really want to hear your voice. You are the voice of everyone who vapes in Nunavut, and we know that there's more than one person. So email Marion Burt, MarionBurt @bell.net. Like super easy. Marion Burt. It's not like Maria Papayawanu at thesafefulvorium.com with all different spellings. It's Marion Burt @bell.net. If you are a consumer, this is your opportunity to share your story. Like I said at the beginning, vaping is bigger than one person. You found a way to quit smoking, and I'm sure you've shared it with others. And if you have it inside of you to share your story to help future people, please go ahead and email Marianne.
But if you don't get an answer immediately, it might be because I'm deluged, because I also get mails for people who want to rescue cats or want to adopt cats and all my TM stuff. And so,
Okay.
yeah, okay.
Okay, we do have a question here from this chat. And is it possible that Health Canada is unwilling to admit that they are wrong or were wrong, and this is why they doubled down on policy against vaping? Like, could it be?
I'll have a go at that.
Oh, okay, no
You
problem.
may, some people may not like my answer. I think Health Canada has put in place a huge number of measures over the years that have created a non-smoking culture, and those measures have contributed enormously to the reduction in smoking. But I fear that what happens in government agencies, and I won't just say about Health Canada alone here, but whenever you have a government agency that has been empowered to act in a very positive way over a long period of time, and then an opportunity comes along which democratizes choices for individuals. In other words, the bureaucracy or the government body no longer needs to direct, no longer needs to put in place measures in the same way that they used to need to put measures in place. And that all they really need to do is to put a couple of incentives out there, and people will see the light themselves. And I think agencies in general, whether they be government agencies or any ruling agency, has difficulty coming to terms with new environments where, when the decisions are democratized or put at arm's length, or they go into the hands of the public with sufficient information and they become less important, I think all agencies in that position find that they're at a crossroads. And maybe there's a little bit of that in Health Canada at the moment.
And David?
Just to add to that, I think the culture in tobacco control, and I played a big role in causing it to happen, was to fight the cigarette companies. It was a battle against those companies. You go back to the time where they were refusing to acknowledge that, any cigarette had ever caused any harm to anybody in the history of mankind, and all sorts of other nonsense. They were a very easy group to demonize. And I think that created a bit of a war on tobacco mentality, that we were fighting evil rather than seeing that as a tactic to promote public health. And part of the war thing is that a lot of people don't want to ever acknowledge that they were wrong about something, because that makes it look like, you know, there's something wrong with them. So rather than evaluating policy and saying, how can we do this better? What might we have got wrong? I think there's a reluctance to acknowledge that. We certainly see it in anti-vaping groups, where just like we experienced historically on smokeless tobacco or Swedish snus or various other low-risk products, people will throw dirt. You know, they'll say it causes popcorn lung. And if you show, no, it actually doesn't. It causes E. valli. And you say, well, no, not only doesn't it, but it couldn't. No, well, it causes a gateway effect. And they never apologize, because it's not, again, using the Enlightenment, this idea of seeking truth. It's not a matter of trying to rationally, you know, use science and reason to try to figure something out. It's that they've taken a side. And if you look at it more like people are cheering for a sports team, like where you say, you know, you're a fan of which team? I mean, come on, they suck. I mean, and there's no way they can give you any ground at all, because, you know, it's much more of a visceral, almost religious sort of commitment to an issue. And I think we need to find ways for Health Canada to get past that and to call out the groups that are supposed to be based on science who are behaving in that sort of way.
Thank you.
Go for it. You can hold your own microphone. Oh, but I need it back.
Oh, okay. My question's for Dr. Irvine. You showed a graph of Juul sales after they remove flavors. Now, we have a bit of an idea of what happened in Nova Scotia, but it's not a real ban, because cross-border sales, there's no border, so they could buy from other provinces. That's right. So my question is, are there any models that maybe you have worked on so we can project what this industry, what this technology would look like if a flavor ban was to come into play? Because when I look at this graphic, everything went down, but there were other valuable options that went up. But if you remove everything, what happens?
It scares me much more than even more than the concentration limit does, to be honest with you, because I think there are so many ways around this. I think it's going to do a great deal of damage to people who want to quit smoking. I think it's going to, if it comes to pass, I think it's going to provide an enormous incentive for people to find ways around it, whether they be legal or illegal. But I have no idea of how big the illegal sector is going to be, or to what degree the legal sector can find ways around the flavor bans. So my answer is I just have no idea. I have no idea.
I do. I never thought that I would have a lifetime supply of nicotine in my freezer, but I do.
Yeah, I've no doubt that people will miss it. When I say I've no idea, is that I've no idea how the legal versus the illegal sectors in the economy are going to evolve. We just all take it for granted that in the cigarette business, it's at least 20% nationally illegal. That's just a given. Nobody questions that. You know, whether you're in the CRA or the Department of Finance, that's just a given, because cigarettes are relatively easy to manufacture, and why would vaping supplies be any different? But don't ask me to put a number on it. I just wish I could, but I can't.
If I could give a perhaps optimistic view of where things go. There's a wonderful book from a few years ago by Downs and Nunes called Big Bang Disruption, and it talks about how technology is changing very, very rapidly, and that it is impossible to stop it. And their argument is that nothing can slow the adoption of new technology more than regulation. No regulation more than health regulation. But even health regulation can't stop it. And that's because of the role of the internet for getting information, the role of social media for sharing information. Consumers are going to get these things. You know, you can't stop it. It's like trying to stop, you know, information getting out to people in an authoritarian state, or trying to stop blue jeans and getting into to Russia during the Soviet era. People find ways around these rules. And it's a matter of whether government will work with people to give them what they want or be an obstacle to them. But the barriers will be overcome. It's only a matter of time.
Chris, do you have anything to add to this?
Well, yeah, a whole bunch of things, all valid points being made here, but it is likely, and Health Canada admitted this in their consultation document, that some number of former smokers who are using e-cigarettes are going to go back to smoking. Okay, they made ridiculous claims about that I won't go into. Then there's the question of what about black markets? And if Health Canada is supposed to do anything to protect the health of Canadians, it ought to be to prevent unregulated. Now I buy my vaping supplies out of the back of a van down by the river. There's no quality control. I don't know what the ingredients are. At least at the moment, there's mechanisms in place to find out what the ingredients are from legitimate sellers, right? If you ban flavors, you take that all away. And make no mistake, vapors are going to find ways around that. And a lot of them are going to find really dumb ways around that, and bad things are going to happen. It doesn't matter, you know, what the number is. There are just bad things that are going to happen. It would be like letting me sell meat from a stand at the end of my driveway. It's just a dumb idea to have it completely unregulated. I also agree that there's the whole enforcement issue that everybody screams, think of the children, but there's not a lot of effort put in to actually doing something about that, right? Kids are still drinking, kids are still using drugs, even though, you know, you've got to be of legal age to buy alcohol or buy cannabis anywhere in Canada. So enforcement is a big issue, and that's a huge issue, which is only going to balloon if you drive it all underground, right? If you drive it all underground, who's patrolling down by the river looking for the vans selling unregulated e-liquid? Who's poking into people's bathrooms to look, are you mixing liquid in your bathtub and selling it to your neighbors? Nobody. There's no authority to do that. We have no way to do it. So anyway, if they have a plan, it's a bad plan. That's it.
Just something to this again. I couldn't find anything in the cost-benefit analysis that Health Canada does to support the regulations it's been proposing, the flavor ban and also the nicotine concentration ban. I could not find anything in their reports that places a cost on illegal activity, which is sort of surprising. Which is sort of surprising when you think about it. That the cost of illegal activity is not a cost that enters the cost-benefit analysis. It's only one of the many things that I was uncomfortable with, but it's not
shocking. There. It's a shocking omission. If you can predict what people are going to do, either they're going to go back to smoking, which is going to increase death and disability, or they're going to go to a black market, then you should look at both sides of that equation, and they don't.
Okay, thank you. I just want to add something to this, is that so when we went across Canada with that RV, which looks really, really fancy, but I do have to say it was from 2006 and fell apart along the way many times, unlike what other people have said about the fanciness of the RV. And we didn't have air conditioning all the time during the hottest time of the summer. But when we went across, we got to meet thousands and thousands of Canadians who had stopped vaping from smoking. One of the oldest signatures we had, quit date, was, I believe, 2000, and it's either 2003 or 2006. So this is way before the 2009 market, where a few of us early adopters came in. So vaping has been around for almost 2 decades. This industry went from gray market, and that's what I like to call it, gray market, from gray market to regulated market, and going down to black market. What happened during that time between regulations from when the first vape shop opened, and I think one of the people who owned the first vape shop is actually in this room, and to when TVPA came in, we grew as an industry. We started forcing manufacturers to test their liquids on stuff that we were fearful of. Popcorn lung, still.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone in Canada has gotten popcorn lung. I haven't been able to find a case of it other than Northumberland for those 2 weeks. Also, you know, on our call, Health Canada said 0 people have died from vaping-related illness in Canada. 0 people have died. 48,000 died last year. 100 people will die by the end of the day, and 100 people will die tomorrow. We need to keep, and then you see all this stuff coming out saying for the children, what are you protecting? You're creating a black market. If there's nothing that if we didn't learn anything from Avali, other than the fact that electronic cigarettes had nothing to do with it, but we do know that black market had everything to do with it. We're putting every single person who smokes at greater risk by keep making this product less appealing, less accessible, and less affordable. I mean, think about it. Anybody here who vaped in 2009 and bought their their e-liquid from China and waited for those DHL things, it was inconsistent. Things were floating in the e-liquid sometimes. But then you started finding manufacturers in Canada and they started having those standards, that pride. I'm not saying that all black market e-liquid is going to be bad, but there are going to be bad players, and it's going to get more difficult, and people fear dying, and that's a big reason why people are vaping, because they don't want to die from a tobacco related illness. We have to continue to fight it. So what would great regulations look like? That's my last question for all of you.
Simple, risk proportionate. Risk proportionate regulation, and you basically solve this problem combined with information. So empower people to make healthier personal decisions, make the products available, and use risk proportionate regulation so that the deadlier products, the cigarettes are much higher taxed, that the marketing rules reflect relative harm. We could move the market very rapidly. And if we're looking at places like Japan that reduced cigarette sales by almost 50% in just 6 years without really trying. What could we do if we really tried? What if we aligned policy? What if we gave information? You know, could we get rid of 90% of smoking in 5 years? I mean, it's possible. And imagine the breakthrough that we would have and how close that is to past breakthroughs like dealing with smallpox or polio, what we've managed to accomplish in greatly reducing the death rates from so many other things. This one's staring us in the face, and it's easy.
Thanks a lot. You went into such detail. Actually, I looked to the UK because from the beginning, the UK did. Well, it inherited some of the regulations from the European Union, but it never demonized vaping, and it always did promote vaping as a help to people who smoked, and supported vaping in that regard to the extent of putting vape shops in hospitals to encourage people to switch to vaping. I know I follow this from time to time, and you know there's opposition there, and there are little wrinkles in it. But the result has been that the UK smoking rate has dropped faster than anywhere else, and the youth vaping rate has always been minuscule. The kids know that, well, here it's vaping is being dangled as this forbidden fruit from the beginning. And so, you know, every kid worth his salt is going to try it. Whereas in the UK, there was never anything forbidden about it. It was just for people like me, you know, and so there's nothing exciting about it. And that, I think, it was a much saner approach. Ian? Oh, you got one.
Well, I would say stop using the word epidemic. We had an epidemic of toxicity in the 1990s when kids were smoking. As I said in my presentation, today's daily vapors are taking in about 1% of the toxins that the daily smokers were taking in the 1990s. So stop using the word epidemic, even though that's what the media likes to use, because it gathers attention. And the other thing I would say is, look at what 20-year-olds are doing, as I said a few moments ago. 20-year-olds have more information than 40 and 50-year-olds, and they are acting on it, and their daily smoking rates are the lowest of any age group apart from teens. They are the ones who have information, they're informed, and they've made decisions to quit smoking. Vaping is not a gateway. Look at the 20-year-olds, and they should guide our policy.
Chris.
I just want to follow up a little bit on the last comment about where the idea of epidemic of youth vaping came from. Okay, it didn't come from epidemiologists poring over spreadsheets and deciding, oh my God, look at this, we have an epidemic. It came from a small focus group that FDA ran, and they found that youth responded to the word epidemic. They were frightened by it. It scored higher than any other word that they could put on it. And so we shall now deem this an epidemic. And epidemiologists, all their heads fell and they stroked their beards and thinking, do these people even understand what that word means? Well, apparently not, because it persists. It persists. It persists. No matter if you look at, teen vaping rates, they're just about hit the floor, and smoking rates too. And how you can hold your head high and say, think of the children who must do something about this epidemic. It can't last. You can't keep doing that. So risk proportionate regulation, I think, is a key. It's one of them, to make sure, as David said, that people are armed with the information they need and they have options and away they go. Now you have ridiculous things happening, like in the States, they authorized very low nicotine cigarettes. So, okay, we've known forever, who is it that said, Rudder, people smoke for the nicotine but die from the tar? Here's an idea. Let's get rid of the nicotine and leave the tar. So you can keep smoking cigarettes and be exposed to all the toxins, but what you don't get is nicotine. And I'm not sure what the grand idea is behind that, well, it will make them non-addictive. So I don't know, youth won't start smoking them. Well, youth aren't going to smoke them anyway, because they're not smoking cigarettes anymore. And established adult smokers are going to have to, I don't know what they would do, like smoke 70 of these things a day to get the nicotine titration that they need. I don't know. But that's like the dumbest idea next to youth epidemic that I have ever seen from any government agency anywhere. And the minute I hear the word epidemic parroted by Canadian government authorities, I have to kind of scream into my pillow.
Thank you. And you kind of have to always scream, especially after what we've gone through in the last 2 years with COVID, and make a good comparison. I want to thank all our guests today for attending. Thank you for being part of this Q&A. You guys can go back to your seats now. Thank you so much. So we're going to close it out now. To me, today was a really, really big deal. I've always wanted to do something like this. I was always jealous of the conferences that were, and jealousy is my motivator. You can ask I mean, I want Canada to be the best. I want our industry here. I want our consumers to have the best voices, to have the best opportunity to be able to have access to harm reduction. Last week, I attended the conference in Washington, and so many people from around the world said, what happened? We were all looking at Canada.
Yeah.
And I just said, well, kind of EVALI happened, and then everything went crazy. So we had something good. We had a good basis, and I do believe we can get back to it if we just pull back those layers that were built. I totally believe it, but we can't do it without the voice of the people who use the product. Kudos to Marion for always sending those emails and, you know, getting the voice of the consumer at the table, being heard by Health Canada. And thank you to Health Canada for hearing them. And for the past 10 years, I can say that every single person who smoked was bullied for smoking, or actually more than that. It's probably the only addiction where we encourage people to shame someone into quitting. You'll see a young kid go up to someone who's smoking and saying, "You smell, your teeth are yellow, you need to quit." We don't say that about other addictions. But we also are bullied for vaping, for making the switch. And we're also bullied into staying quiet. And we did. Because that shame as smokers carried over when we found an alternative. Because as soon as we were sharing it to other people, oh my God, I quit smoking, blah, 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 blah. Oh, but it's the same. Oh, it's going to cause you popcorn lung, blah, 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 blah. So we started being quiet. But we can't be quiet anymore. We need to continue to fight to have a voice at every single table, at every single conference. There was one conference that let us all in. And that was with, I know, shocking. They let us in. And it was that Rob Schwartz guy, OTRU. They let us in. And the most shocking thing that I heard during this conference was the former Minister of Health, Jane Philippot, said, you need to start calling Health Canada. You need to get your people working for the Ministers of Health. You need to get your people in the offices of Health Canada to start pushing Health Canada to force the tobacco companies to pay for our programs. The irony in that is they want us, like all I thought was, oh my God, they want us to stay smoking so they can be paid their bills. There's nothing wrong with us doing the exact same thing. Asking Health Canada for a seat at the table, demanding that more studies are done for adults who smoke. All the studies are about youth. We have that right. Our voices don't need to be silenced. How many times have we all been excluded from there? Have we felt excluded? We felt like second-class citizens. Like, literally, they're writing press releases warning the government about us. Like, I don't know how powerful they think we are, but like kudos to all of us. But what's happened is we've wasted years, 5 years of regulating the solution to look like the problem. Think about that. The solution is vaping, and we've regulated to look just like tobacco. And we've been okay with it for the most part. We've picked and chosen our battles, and that's okay. Because when you know better, you do better. And we know better. We see what's happening in the UK. We see what's happening in New Zealand. And we can be that because we had that to start with. So I'm going to encourage each and every one of you here in the room, go out there and have a conversation. Keep emailing your MPs. Look, Marion emailed the Minister of Health, and then she got connected to Health Canada, and look what's going on. And that wasn't just because she decided to do it one day. It was a process. She emails all the time. It takes a few minutes. Also, my other secret goal is to make the government of Canada stop allowing free mail for MPs because we've mailed them so much about vaping. So let's go out there and mail your MP. It's free. Write them a handwritten letter. There's something romantic about it. But there's also this perception that it means a lot more than sending an email. Sitting down and putting pen to paper, it is a big deal. There's a process when they open it out. Just make that little extra effort. Because the other side of this, if we don't continue to fight, is we're not going to have this product available. This product is not going to be effective because there will be no flavors. We're going to have less nicotine, and it's going to be taxed just like cigarettes. So less accessibility, less affordable, and less pleasurable. And if someone can give me a real reason why people who smoked shouldn't have an enjoyable solution, please let me know. That doesn't shame me. Just let me know. Additionally, we need to continue to build the relationships with the people that are not listening to us. Don't give up. Keep emailing them. Once a week, set up a schedule. There is nothing wrong. They're just going to block you eventually, but that doesn't mean you didn't try. Just keep emailing them. They can't ignore us. Because really, at the moment right now, they don't see us as human beings. They see us as smokers, not people who smoked. It's a big difference. So let's put faces to those. We're not going to be demonized. We need to continue to have these conversations, because if we don't continue, the losers in all this are Canadian smokers, Canadians who smoke and vape, because somehow we've demonized the solution, and we've been demonized because we dare to have an addiction that they don't understand. So thank you, everybody.